My name is Kadir. That's good enough. So I'm a postdoctoral fellow at Princeton this year, and my main research is on the moderation of Islamist parties in the Middle East specifically, but I'm trying to branch out from that. Let me put my...
Do you need the lights off?
No. Yeah, sorry, yes. Okay. So what I want to talk about today is two things, basically. First one is the journey, the trajectory, historical trajectory of democratization. Okay. The historical trajectory of democratization of Turkey from early 20th century up until today. And in the second half, I'd like to talk about the international issues that Turkey faces today that would partly be the European Union, partly sort of the regional power issues, regional power dimensions. Okay, so this is a map of Turkey regionally. So what strikes us in the first place is that Turkey is in a location where it connects different parts of the world, different worlds, different regions. On the one hand, we see the Balkans, then the Black Sea region, the Caucasus, then into Asia, Middle East, sort of the Red Sea area in the south, Africa, between Africa, Asia, and Europe. So it sits on a really interesting location. It gives us the impression that it's sort of a natural bridge between different kind of strategically located, so that's a very important piece of information. But more importantly, Turkey is predominantly Muslim in terms of its population, but at the same time it has a working secular democracy. So many people have pointed this out as a model for the Muslim world. Another point that's important about Turkey is the prospects of economic development. Turkey, as part of the developing world, the so-called developing world, has made great strides into becoming a country that is developing very quickly, and especially in the last decade or so. Turkey actually has grown quite a bit in the last several years. It has relations, it's part of sort of what we can call the Western world in a way. It has strong relations with the Western world, the US and the European Union and everything. But it also has good relations, and that's, I think, particularly important due to the fact that it sits in an important region of the world. It has relations with Iran, Syria, Russia, and Israel. As a diverse group of countries as this one is really important to have, especially if you're aspiring to be a important regional actor. I will give you just an example. This is from a survey that was conducted in last month or so. So the survey asked the Middle Eastern people, people in different countries in the Middle East, would you agree with this statement that Turkey can be a model for Middle Eastern countries? And 66% said yes. And another question was, would you agree with this statement that Turkey is a successful synthesis of Islam and democracy? And about the same percentage said yes. And asked why they think Turkey can be a model, many people pointed out the Muslim identity, but a lot of people pointed out economy, democracy, and defense of the Muslim rights on a more global scale. So that's an important indication, I think, what a lot of people are thinking. Yes?
Do you happen to know what nationalities were included in the survey?
I don't know here, but I think it was conducted in 5 or 6 countries in the Middle East. But also, in addition to Presidents Bush and Obama pointing out Turkey as a model for the Middle Eastern countries, or the Muslim world more broadly, in the last couple of weeks there were statements coming from the Middle East itself. An Islamic party leader in the Middle East, in Tunisia, pointed out Turkey as a model, as a potential model for what would be coming for Tunisia. Same thing with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. The leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, or one of the leaders, said Turkey is a model for Egypt as what's unfolding in the country in the last couple of weeks, as you're all aware. So that's important. Okay, and that's a map of energy pipelines going through Turkey, or projected to go through Turkey. As you can see, there's a lot of activity. There's a lot of pipes going from the south. From the north to the south, from the east to the west. That means Turkey, especially in the next decade or so, will be one of the major energy hubs in the world. Even though it doesn't have a lot of natural gas or oil, but it sits on a strategic location that it will enable to control those flows of energy from the east and from the north to the west. So that's an important role that Turkey is slowly assuming. Okay, so some basic facts here. It's a little larger than Texas in terms of its territory, 300,000 square miles. The population is about 75 million. That's second largest in the Middle East after Egypt, and I think also second in Europe after Germany. In terms of its population, 75% Turkish, about 20% Kurdish population ethnically, and 75 to 80% Sunni, and about 20% Alawite, what is known as more Turkish Shiites. And here's a map. There are two maps here. One of them, this one, is showing the Shiites in Turkey, the distribution. The darker, the more dense Shiite population. And here, the darker green areas indicate the more dense Kurdish population here. So these two areas don't really overlap too much, as you can see. So Kurds and Shiites in Turkey are not the same people. They're different. So essentially, there are three major groups we can argue: Sunni Turks, Sunni Kurds, and Shiite Turks, basically. So it's you can simply take this area and plot over here, and that will almost be exclusive from each other. So just to give you an idea of ethnic and religious distribution in Turkey. In terms of the economy, GDP size, purchasing power parity is $958 billion, that's 2010 figures. Official exchange rate is $729 billion. That puts Turkey at number 16 or 17 in terms of the size of the economy globally. And it's projected to be, at this rate of growth, one of the top 10 countries in the next decades. GDP per capita is about $12,000, exports $117 billion, imports $166 billion, and you can see the difference between the two, and that's largely due to energy imports, because Turkey doesn't have oil or natural gas, so it has to import quite a bit. Okay, so making the transition to democracy right now. So here's a cartoon that I like very much. Not particularly because it's drawn very well, but because of the message that it sends. So basically, it says here, it's time to protect the ballot box, obviously referring to democracy. And the guy over there says, on second thought, should we have hired a civilian security, for the sake of image, or nothing else? And here's a soldier, as you can see. So the trajectory of Turkish democracy has been one of military oversight, military supervision, military sort of protection. The military has been the guardian of democracy since from the very beginning. So that's the character, and that's slowly starting to change in the last decade or so. That's the sort of takeaway point from this brief introduction. So going back to early 20th century, the Young Turk Revolution in 1908 is the important starting point for Turkish democracy, I would think. In 1908, the Young Turks, under the umbrella organization called the Committee of Union and Progress, have overthrown Sultan Abdülhamid II in 1908 and replaced him with a different sultan from the same family. But the upshot of this sort of the military coup was that the Committee of Union and Progress, the Young Turks, were able to seize the government, the cabinet, the prime minister position. So they effectively were in charge of the executive. And they hold, so here's another picture, just to give you an idea of the Young Turk Revolution, soldiers walking through the streets of Istanbul. And here's another picture. In 1908, they immediately after the military coup, they hold elections. And one of their sort of key points was that, key arguments was that they would like to bring constitutional monarchy, like in many European countries at the time. So democracy was obviously not a popular term at the time. Constitutional monarchy, on the one hand, you would have a monarch, but at the same time, he would be bound by a constitution, rule of law. So ideally, in principle, he would not be he couldn't make arbitrary rule, basically. So here we can see the ballot boxes and people are out there to vote. And that's actually a pretty fair election. A lot of different sections, cross-section of the society, religious and ethnically, are represented in this elections, in this parliament in 1908. But that's fairly short-lived. In 1909, a small group of people demonstrated in favor of monarchy, and partly infused with call for Sharia Islamic law. Then the Committee of Union and Progress, the governing party, actually just basically clamped down on them. That is called the March 31st incident. But the point was that the parliament is not necessarily suspended, but it was not functioning until the end of the First World War, essentially. So it was pretty much a one-party rule. Democracy was almost effectively suspended. And when it was after the World War, when the Ottoman Empire lost the war, this Committee of Union and Progress actually left the office. But their legacy was there. This was the first sort of, they overtook by military coup. And most of these people among young Turks were actually soldiers. And the important point here is that these were kind of elites, secular. Some of them, important proportion, were Western educated. They were soldiers. They were aspiring modernizers of their country. So we have this image of a unique identity for this group of people, and this is what we're going to see essentially establishing the young Turkish Republic in 1923. Yes.
Would you like questions during or after?
I would appreciate clarification questions, but substantive questions, if you could wait until the end of the presentation, that would be good, because Zinta would be quite mad at me if I don't finish in 35 minutes.
We'll have a lot of time for questions, so if they can wait, do so. If it's a clarification question, by all means ask now.
Yes.
Okay, well I'll ask and you can decide. How did such a small group have such power? When you said that it was the call of the monarchy was by a small group.
Well, I mean, they were soldiers. Some of them were generals, so they controlled a lot of military power. So that's what has given them a lot of power. And popular revolutions was not, a favorite move on the part of a lot of people at the time. So military was quite instrumental. So the CUP, Committee of Union and Progress, became quite authoritarian in its rule, short-lived rule. Ataturk was the leader of the Independence War, 1919-1922. He was famous as the hero of the Dardanelles War in World War I. He was a member of the Committee of Union and Progress, so he was part of this Young Turk Revolution right from the beginning. He was one of those taking part in the revolution in 1908. So he had these ideas of secularism and modernization and, sort of emulating the Western civilization, bringing Turkey up par with the Western civilization over time. So he had these ideas. And he was a very good soldier, but at the same time, he was a very good politician. So he set up for the Independence War, this movement, first an assembly, a parliament in Ankara, away from Istanbul, the capital, the capital of the Ottoman Empire. Called the Turkish Grand National Assembly, in Turkish acronyms TBMM, 1920. And he was able to sort of mobilize different groups within the country to support, to put their weight, put their support behind this independence war. And he was successful in 1922. All wars ended. Turkey was, or Turkish people were independent again. Turkish Republic would be established in 1923 as a separate political entity. And one of the very first things that Ataturk had done is actually to bring together defense of national rights organizations that were part of this independence movement together to form what is called the People's Party, or later on Republican People's Party. And this would effectively be the single party in the first 20-30 years of the Republic. So this would be the vehicle that Atatürk ruled, and also his immediate successor, ruled the country, just like we see in many developing countries today. And here are a couple of pictures of him. Here, I think, is the latest one, and the other ones are early 1920s. And here's one of the early covers of the Time magazine, volume 1 and number 4, so that's kind of interesting, I think. 1923, Turkish Republic is proclaimed. Atatürk becomes the president. His close friend from the military, from the army, İsmet İnönü becomes the prime minister. 1922, they abolished the Sultanate in Istanbul. 1924, they abolished the Caliphate in Istanbul. And that is effectively ends a potential source of opposition to his rule. That is important to note, I think. And quickly, Atatürk monopolized power in his own hands. As I said, he is a good politician, so he knows his way around those times. I mean, he was a great leader, but at the same time, we would have to think that he's a politician. He wants to make sure to control politics as the leader of the country. So high treason law, tightly controlled elections were part of this process, along with the Republican People's Party as an institutional mechanism.
Clarification?
Yes.
Tightly controlled elections?
Well, essentially, these are one-party elections, sort of, and he would put those on the slate, ballot that he favored. Not anyone could run for an office or, for a seat in the parliament, essentially. Yes.
So, Abdul Hamid is the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire?
Yes, he's the 32nd, 33rd Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, I think, between 1876 and 1908. So there were some little experiments with democracy. In 1924, he allowed, Atatürk granted permission to establish another political party called Progressive Republican Party in 1924, but that was short-lived, lived only for a year. After, when there was a nationalist sort of rebellion in southeast Turkey by the Kurdish minority, that pretty much all liberties were suspended. These sort of independence courts were established, military courts to execute people. So in 1930, another party was allowed to be established called the Free Republican Party. But again, this time on the pretext of religiously motivated incident in Western Turkey, again, this party was closed, and the fear was that these parties would endanger the national unity of the country. Remember, this is a newly established country. National unity is really important. And remember the almost centuries old of disintegration of the Ottoman Empire. So this was really important for a lot of the political leaders at the time, including Atatürk. He engaged in a lot of secularization and modernization reforms. 1924, a law called Unification of Education Law essentially ended the religious education in the country, religious colleges. 1925, religious shrines and Sufi convents were banned. 1925, turban and fez was prohibited to wear in public. 1926, European calendar, Swiss civil code and penal code from Mussolini's Italy, adapted in 1928. Turkey moved from the Arabic alphabet to the Latin alphabet. So as you can see, a lot of changes happening in a matter of a decade. So these are really big changes. And this is, I think, a good illustration of the movement of Turkish society in terms of its attire within a century. The change from here to here came in sort of early to mid 19th century, and the change came in 1920s and 30s. So what we're seeing here is sort of, he is slowly undermining the source of power for a potential opposition to himself. That is religious people, religious scholars, that is religious institutions, because that's usually one of the most powerful actors during this time in the Middle East, including Turkey. And we see the same thing happening in Iran or other countries, in Egypt, for example. In Iran, Reza Shah does the same thing. In Egypt, Nasser does the same thing in 1950. So they're trying to make sure they're undermining the source of power, the legitimacy of a lot of these religious institutions and leaders. So the true sort of transition to democracy comes in late 1940s and early 1950s. 1946, after the Second World War, the successor of Atatürk, İsmet İnönü, allows for a second party to be formed, from within the Republican People's Party. In 1946, the same year, elections were held. And the new party is called the Democrat Party. They won a little bit of a minority in the parliament, 62 seats out of 465, and that's largely because of the massive electoral fraud. In the sense that it was open vote, close count. That is, you will have to go in and you will have to vote publicly in front of the officials, and that's probably as scary in and of itself. But at the same time, after the time was over to vote, the doors would be locked. There was no, impartial supervision. So God knows what was happening within that room. 1950, 4 years after a second set of elections, Democratic Party wins in landslide, a major win. They win 53% of the votes, not big, but because of the electoral system, they win 85% of the seats. This is a staggering amount of seats in parliament. Yes.
So what happened in those 4 years?
4 years, I think they received some. The Republican People's Party, or the regime, actually got some sort of criticism from the Democrat Party, from the people as a result of. But I'm assuming also from international actors like the U.S. at the beginning. So as a result, we see a more sort of fair elections. So here's the first prime minister of the party, Democrat Party, the leader of the party called Menderes, and another time cover. And here's a pamphlet from one of those elections, and it says, "Enough is enough. The people will have their say now." At the top, and at the bottom it says Democrat Party. Okay, so the first half of 1950s was fairly good, I think, in many ways. Economic growth was pretty significant first half. Import substitution, industrialization policy was implemented, which essentially was saying that as a developing country, imports would be substituted by domestic production with heavy subsidization, with heavy state protection against imports. Okay, and the goal would be, in the long term, these companies would turn competitive internationally, globally, and they would start exporting. The important point here is, with this policy, was that a local industrial bourgeoisie, that is an economic elite, started slowly growing as a result of the protection afforded to these big companies, as a result of the subsidies. Most of the resources, the economic policy making, was favoring these bigger companies instead of smaller companies. So this is another sort of division that we're seeing. At the first, what we saw was secular religious sort of conflict, slowly brewing in 1920s and 30s, and 1950s, this economic, socioeconomic dimension between sort of an economic elite as opposed to the masses or smaller and medium businesses. 1952, Turkey becomes a member of NATO. 1954, the third election is held, and the Democrat Party actually has improved results. They obtained 57% of the votes, 92% of the seats, as opposed to 85 in 1950. So that's a significant improvement. Remember, this is the incumbent party. So oftentimes we see incumbent parties losing in the next election. They may win the election, but they're losing votes or seat shares. None of them happened here. So apparently people were fairly satisfied with the party's policies. However, after 1950s, mid-1950s, things take a turn for worse in Turkey. Second half of 50s, political tensions increased incredibly. And in 1960, the military intervenes for the first time in Turkish history. They overtake the power for a year. They write a new constitution, brand new constitution, and it's voted, and only 60% of the people have approved the constitution. That's fairly low, I think, for a military drafted constitution, military oversight. In 1961, more importantly, the Justice Party, that is viewed as a successor to the banned Democrat Party, wins the election. I think this is a strong indication. There's a strong indication that people were not happy with the military intervention in 1960. 1971, fairly chaotic period throughout 1960s and 70s. 1971, another military intervention. This time they don't take power, directly, but move the government out of office and replace it with one that they favored. 1980, another military coup. This time they hold on to the power for 3 years, direct rule by the military. Democracy returns only in 1983 with parliamentary elections. Okay, early 1980s. So this is the critical time for Turkish history, tectonic changes taking place, not because what's happening in politics, but because of what's happening in the economy. Turkey, with the economic crisis that it faced, balance of payments crisis at the end of 1970s, actually was forced to undertake economic liberalization policies, structural adjustment program under the guidance of IMF and the World Bank. And that was actually pretty important because that changed the underlying dynamics of socioeconomic power in Turkey. What we see at the end of this decade is actually the small economic and political elite that controlled most of economic and political power actually had to give up some of the control to a larger population. The small and medium businesses were able to benefit from this economic liberalization as trade liberalization we're talking about, financial liberalization, privatization, integration to the global economy. Competitiveness domestically increases, economic competition increases. So a lot of these small businesses were actually able to export due to export promotion policies implemented during this time. What this means is these people, small, medium businesses, and a lot of people as a result of trade liberalization started prospering from this process. In mid-1980s, well through today. So the implication here is that economic liberalization became the catalyst for the socioeconomic and political transformation of Turkish society. That is, those once excluded and marginalized slowly started moving to the center of political and economic power. Those smaller medium companies that almost didn't exist in 1980 turned into companies that had hundreds of millions of dollars annual turnovers. Some of them even billions of dollars of turnovers every year. Yes.
And what kind of businesses were those? What were they doing?
Any kind of business. I mean, some of them in food industry, some of them textile, some of them industrial. There's no specific trend here. Textile was obviously a big thing, but not the only thing. Yes.
So what transition took place whereby the earlier favored large companies subsidized?
Okay.
Now we have this change. What was the...
Well, the change was essentially those marginalized and excluded people or the businesses essentially slowly started thriving. They in terms of their income, they become richer. In terms of the size of these companies, they become bigger companies. So now they demanded favorable policy making. As opposed to protection, they asked for more integration to the global economy. They asked for for the canceling of all those subsidies and incentives provided to those bigger companies, the advantages. So basically the argument was that the state should be out of politics, should be out of economy, right? Because that way that would enable a fair competition conditions. That's all they asked, for most of the part. Okay, so here's the key person for this in this process of economic liberalization called Turgut Özal. Sort of the short, stocky guy on the right-hand side, like George Costanza. He's funny, but he's not as sinister. But he's one of the most sort of favored politicians of Turkish history. A lot of people loved him because he was actually a self-made man. Maybe that's one of the reasons. He was not coming from a particular background, social or political, economic elite. He was working with the World Bank, so he was highly supported at the time, 1980s and 1990s, early 1990s. 1990s was the time when political Islam rose significantly in Turkey, especially in mid-1990s. 1994, there were local elections. They won 19% of the vote, but most importantly, they won the mayorships of Istanbul and Ankara. This was big. This was really something unheard of in Turkish history. Here you have a country that's been trying to secularize for 70 years, 65 years, 70 years. And at the end of the day, political Islam is rising so significantly. They went the mayor positions in Istanbul and Ankara, two of the biggest cities. That was really big. In 1995, they win the parliamentary elections with 21% of the vote, plurality winner. But they were not coalition partners in 1995, but in 1996 and 7 they were. It was a short-lived coalition government rule. They were not particularly successful in any meaningful way, but what happened in 1997 was this, the military intervened in the process. The military, with a National Security Council meeting on February 28, 1997, engaged in what is called postmodern coup today. That is, they didn't take control of the government, they didn't force the government out immediately. What they had was a list of conditions that they demanded the government meet. 15, 16 point, I think. And some of them actually were, there was a list of green capital referring to those businesses that had an Islamic sort of background, or not as a business, but as personalities. They were coming from a more religious background, more conservative background, but they were doing business like any other business. So but they were referred to as the green capital. This sort of list contained conditions saying, headscarves in universities should be banned. Women wearing headscarves should not be allowed into the universities because it's against secularism, is the argument. And there were strict limitations on religious education that children could get, essentially. It's not until almost the middle school that parents could legally allow their children to have religious education. A couple months after that, the government is removed from power, the Islamist party. And here are two pictures I think I found very interesting. The first one is a tank is rolling in the streets of Ankara as a sort of show of power, I think, as a threat. And the second one is, so you see the numbers 2 and 8 referring to February 28. And one of them has a military hat and the other one has the sort of the academic hat. Those are referring to two of the pillars of this sort of postmodern coup. On the one hand, the military was really strong, but at the same time, the academic community was, especially the sort of the administration of academic community, was really they really put their support behind this postmodern coup, against the Islamic party. So what followed in the next 5 years was almost absolute chaotic environment in Turkey, in the sense that coalition governments were not able to do anything, any policy, action. And in 2001, Turkey faced its worst economic crisis in its history. Turkish lira lost its value, half of its value overnight. And that was, as you can imagine, something pretty big. Essentially, most of people lost half of their income overnight. This was something really big. And in 2002, parliamentary elections were held, and without exclusion, all of the parties that were part of this 4 or 5 year coalition governments were out of the parliament. None of them won any single seat in the parliament. Instead, what we see is a party called Justice and Development Party that separated, that parted ways with the Islamic Party of 1990s, won the majority in the election. 34% of the seats, but 65% of the seats. That's thanks to a 10% national threshold for winning any seats in the parliament. This party called AKP in Turkish acronyms, had a new political platform distinct from political Islam. They were economically liberal, as liberal as it gets in terms of the economy. They were committed to democratic values, not only procedures but values. So they were committed to a pluralistic understanding of democracy, as good as it gets in the Middle East. And they were also, in terms of the values, they were not asking for an Islamic state, Islamic law, but instead they were emphasizing Muslim values that were predominant in the society, much like the Christian democratic parties in Europe. Nonetheless, this party was threatening was a source of concern for a lot of seculars in Turkey. Why? The next picture might give us some indication for that. So the top one is the president of Turkey, and the bottom one is the prime minister and his wife. So what's common in these two pictures, other than the mustache?
Haji.
Yes, the headscarf. So both women are wearing headscarves. And this is the first time in Turkish history whose 95% of population is Muslim, where we see a prime minister or a president's wife wearing headscarf. I mean, this is really big. As I said, you know, here you have 70, 80 years of secular sort of indoctrination, secular ideals, and there you have a party that's ruling, essentially with headscarves. You know, that is really not comforting for a lot of people. Even though the political discourse, political platform was distinctly moderate and in no way was calling for Islamic law or Islamic state.
Excuse me,
Yes.
the date again for that, 19...
I'm sorry? The date?
the year.
Well, I mean, he's the prime minister since 2002, 2003, and he's president since 2007. So this party, okay, won the election in 2002, and they're in power since 2002. Obviously, there will be a secular backlash because this is, given the social cleavages, social conflict in Turkey, there is a socioeconomic aspect to it, but also there is a sort of religious, secular aspect to it. Long story short, I'm not going to go into too much detail of that, but the military and the judiciary and the academic, community took strong stands against the Justice and Development Party. And they had a lot of conflict over the course of years, and there was at one time in 2010, there was a constitutional case brought against the Justice and Development Party, the governing party, to ban the party. And the argument was, the allegation was that the party was acting against the principle of secularism, and that was not substantiated with evidence at all. And a lot of people said, this may be a move from democracy to something called juristocracy, because the judiciary was so active in this process, in this whole process. And the military, once again, intervened in 2002 presidential elections, and with sort of an overnight statement published in their website. That was kind of an interesting way to make a statement. And the party called for early elections in 2007 summer. So a couple months after that, they won the election with 47% of the vote. I mean, that's up 13% from 2002. That's I think, significant reaction from the people for non-democratic intervention in political life, essentially, in democracy. Okay, so I'm shifting gears here. I'm probably running out of time. So international aspects. So one of the issues is European Union membership, obviously. Turkey sort of is a perennial candidate for EU since 1960s, and has not become a member yet, and we don't know if it's ever going to become a member. But the story is that in 1963, with the first application denied, and it was given associate membership in the European Community back in those days. 1987, another application for full membership, it was denied again, declined again. Instead, 1995, Turkey went into customs union with the European Union. Essentially, all barriers to trade would be lifted gradually. So today, that's still in force. Essentially, there's no customs barriers between the two. That is Turkey and European Union. Again, in early 2000s, another full-fledged application for membership. 2004, the current Justice and Development Party actually wins the official candidate status. What this means is, this is a close-ended route. At the end of talks, accession talks, a candidate country becomes a member. There's no alternative. There's no other option. Accession talks began. 15 chapters out of 35 is open. A couple of them actually is closed successfully. An early possible date for membership. There's large sort of variance as to what people predict. It was 2014 and 15, now 2016, 17, or whenever. don't really have an idea, at this time. Yes.
And what's the holdup?
Well, there are a couple holdups, and I will talk about those in a minute. Membership is official state policy, meaning that regardless of the government, regardless of the party in government, every government will work towards European Union membership. And the Justice and Development Party has been the most successful one so far, and this is the party many call an Islamist party. As this doesn't make sense because when you become a member of the European Union, one of the two conditions, according to the Copenhagen criteria, is to have a pluralistic democracy, functioning democracy. And if you're intending to become a member of the EU, there's no way you can revert back to an Islamic state. That would be end of European Union membership. So, I mean, there's this irony. On the one hand, you're accusing the party of having an Islamist agenda, but at the same time, the party is the most enthusiastic in terms of bringing the country to European Union membership. Large segments of bureaucracy is implicitly opposed to this process because they would have to become more transparent, more accountable. They would have to make things work a little bit more smoothly, in a more efficient, productive way. And that, as you can imagine, a bureaucracy, accustomed to a lot of different things other than doing their job, is not favoring. Prior to 2002, nationalist and Islamist parties were opposed to this process. After 2002, nationalists are still opposed, along with the Republican People's Party's opposition, that is Atatürk's own party, unfortunately. This Justice and Development Party, the governing party, is the most enthusiastic supporter with the reforms it's undertaking. Cyprus is a major problem in this regard, the Cyprus dispute. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the situation, but there are two communities on the island, 2/3 Greek majority, 1/3 Turkish minority, and they had a conflict in 1974, and since then the Turkish Republic does not recognize the Greek Cypriot state, and in contrast, the rest of the world recognizes the Greek Cypriots as the sort of the representative, as a state on the island. They don't recognize the Turkish Cypriot state. So that's one of the issues. And the problem is the Greek Cypriots became a member of the EU in 2004, maybe 5. And Turkey is trying to become a member of EU. One of these member states is not recognizing. So that's one of the major issues. That the 20 remaining chapters are not open, essentially. Okay, so here's an interesting picture. Take a look for a couple seconds here. And the blue one is the European Union flag, for those who are not familiar. So what's your first impression? What's coming to your mind?
Well, I think that the picture is trying to say that this is going to be a, quasi-religious state, but that I don't think there's anything to support that. I think it would be an enrichment for the EU to have it's not an Islamic state, it's a secular state, which is Islamic.
Right. This picture was taken in Istanbul, in Turkey. This is done for, I think, artistic purposes by one smart photographer. But it's indicative of a potential source of opposition to Turkish membership. So the major countries that oppose Turkish membership within the EU are France, Germany, and Austria, along with the Netherlands. Italy, Britain, and Spain are supportive of Turkish membership. And there are three sources of opposition to Turkish membership. Okay, one of them is cultural. The argument is that Turkey is not a European country. Turkey is a predominantly Muslim country, and as we have seen in the picture, in a short period of time, if Turkey becomes a member, Europe will be Islamized, will be sort of an Islamic state, will be overtaken by Turks, Muslim Turks. A lot of people oppose that, obviously, arguing with the first argument is that Turkey is a European country since several centuries because it has territory in Europe, physical territory in Europe, but also even today it has a little bit of territory in the European continent, but also institutionally is within Europe since 1856 with the concept of Euro. Ottoman Empire was a signatory on that concert. So it's technically European. I mean, it doesn't have really any grounds for that. More importantly, this Turkish membership with a Muslim majority population will only be encouraging the sort of the diversity, cultural multiculturalism in Europe. Secondly, economic opposition. A lot of people argue that Turkey is a developing country that has weak economic fundamentals, budget deficits and current account deficits, and all of those doesn't have a strong industrial, background. But when we think about the Eastern European countries, former communist countries, I mean, there is no comparison. Turkey fares much better than many of those countries. Turkey is becoming stronger economically day by day, 16, 17 largest economy in the world. And it's, I think, in the last decade or so, one of the top 3-4 countries that has the highest growth rate globally. So that's an important indication of the strength of the economy. Finally, political opposition. People say it has a weak democracy. Military oversight is obviously an issue. But other countries don't oppose Turkish membership because since it has a large population, it would be one of the largest blocs within the European Parliament. So they don't want this strong political influence in that body. But on the other hand, one could argue that Turkey has a growing democracy, maturing democracy, especially in the last decade or so. But more importantly, Turkey has a strong military, so that has arisen as a strong power in the Middle East, as a regional powerhouse in the Middle East that would give an edge to the European Union as a global power. There's this sort of an argument as well, opposing this political opposition. And here's another cartoon. Unfortunately, we can't see the sort of the names here. So there are little names here, text here, referring to country names. And these are in Turkish acronyms EU, okay, European Union. And there is the Prime Minister at the top, and he's asking, what's that constantly sticking here in his back? And this guy says Cyprus, and there are the little names of the countries, as I said. So that's, I think, a really good way to put the sort of this European Union membership debate in perspective. Yes.
The previous slide showed 3 reasons, oppositions.
Yes.
But when you name the countries, who was for and who was against, I'm not sure about Austria, but Germany, France, and the Netherlands have, if you like, Islamic issues with their population.
Austria also has, the Netherlands also has, they have significant population of Muslims.
So I'm looking at, it would seem though that the opposition is almost all cultural and the economic and political are irrelevant to the population.
Well, yeah, population-wise, that's true. These two positions are mostly at state level. It's not population level. I mean, most of the opposition comes from the cultural level, population-wise. And the problem is that, even a country as small as Cyprus, which has only a couple 100,000 population, can veto Turkish membership or any other prospective membership. In that situation, it's really difficult to come to terms with the reality that Turkey may never become a member of the EU, not because it doesn't meet the reforms, the requirements of the EU, but because of this sort of odd structure of membership, prospects. Every country has to take it into a referendum, and that means in several countries that's probably going to be voted down, essentially. Okay, and finally, is there an axis shift in Turkish foreign policy? So let's try to remember what happened in the last several years in terms of Turkish foreign policy. There's an increasing tension between Turkish-Israeli relations. One of them was the flotilla last year in 2009. A couple other things in the aftermath of the Israeli attack on Gaza in late 2008, early 2009. But also at the same time, Turkey is increasing its cooperation with countries like Iran, China, and Russia. That's clearly outside of the Western Hemisphere. Turkey is increasing its cooperation at different levels, economic, social, political levels, with Arab countries in the Middle East. It has signed strategic agreements, cooperation agreements with countries like Syria, Jordan, or Lebanon. So those are, if you recognize, those are immediate neighbors of Israel. Okay, so those are really important agreements in many ways, especially for a country trying to become a regional powerhouse. And more importantly, it's trying to forge an independent foreign policy in the last couple of years, especially with the agreement brokered by Turkey and Brazil in terms of the Iranian nuclear capability. So that was, by and large, independent of U.S. and Western demands, in contrast to the U.S. pressures. So that's an indication to the fact that Turkey foreign policy is moving in a different direction. But is it actually moving away from the West to the East? Can we talk about an axis shift, as many have argued? Just two pieces of evidence here. The first one is, these are Turkish exports to selected partners. The top one is, the blue one is EU, the middle one is the Middle East, and at the bottom is Africa over years. What we are seeing here is, at the beginning in 1996, EU is obviously dominating Turkish trade. But over the course of years, EU is increasing significantly, right? And especially this period, after 2002 with the Justice and Development Party, that's still increasing substantially, from slightly above $10 billion a year, above $60 billion a year before the economic crisis in 2008. But it's also moving significantly in Africa and the Middle East, right? So it's not just towards the Middle East and Africa or non-Western world, but along with the West moving in that direction. A second piece of evidence here is the Turkish Prime Minister's foreign visits between 2003 and 2009. At the top you see US with 14 visits, Belgium, the headquarters of the European Union, 13 visits, then Germany, 11 visits. Sort of the more non-Western world, we see Syria, 8 visits, that's the highest one. Russia, 6 visits, Iran, only 3 visits, and down the line, that's pretty much it. China, only 1 visit. So what you're seeing here is that the Western hemisphere is still important for Turkey. It doesn't really lose anything from that. And sort of the visits to non-Western countries doesn't really fare too well in terms of this comparison. So the upshot here is that becoming a rising regional power. It's the tensions between Turkey and Israel in the last years is not so much about religion. It's not about because this party had Islamic origins, in the government in Turkey. That doesn't have anything to do with it. It's about politics. It's about strategic relations in the Middle East. Turkey is trying to become the power in the Middle East, and one way to do that is basically to confront those powers, major powers in the Middle East. And Israel is apparently one of those countries, with its military power. Economically, it's trying to forge relations with different countries, Arab countries, Middle Eastern countries, visa-free travel, pretty much a lot of those countries. Militarily, it's projecting its power to different parts of the world, like Afghanistan, like Lebanon, like Africa. Politically, it's trying to become the mediator in conflicts between different countries. And finally, in terms of its culture, it's also trying to become one of the major countries. The best example, I think, is the selling of TV series, TV shows to pretty much all Middle Eastern countries in the region. And they're the top TV shows in those countries. I mean, incredible amounts of, exports of these TV series. These are just dramas, that people watch in the evenings, but that gives you an idea of, a different world, I think. You can become a Muslim on the one hand, but also you can become sort of this, the more modern, sort of the more westernized idea in the minds of many people. And I will stop here. I hope I didn't...
Don't worry about it. We have 5 minutes for questions.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
No,
Yes.
don't apologize. Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Any questions? Yes.
Where does the resources come from? The
It's all
internal-
state.
So it's internal generated.
Yes, internally generated. I don't think there's any foreign aid, like in the case of Egypt, for example. I don't think that's the case. So it's all state money going into the military. And that's a big problem. That's a big issue, I
You
think.
know roughly the percentage of the budget?
I don't know.
Maybe I can answer that.
Yes.
I think what I heard is around 35% of the general budget goes to the military. And the most chunk of it is because of the so-called Kurdish rebellion with the PKK thing, which has been in the region since 1980s. So that's why Turkish military expense is a lot, is huge, immense. That's why it's a big problem on the Turkish economy as well.
So I think that would make 2-3% of the GDP.
And is there military hardware manufactured internally or bought externally?
An overwhelming majority imported. They're slowly trying to produce those, sometimes in conjunction with the U.S. using fighter jets in Turkey. But obviously the high-tech issues are coming from abroad. That's one of the issues I think a lot of soldiers are opposing this sort of opening because they will lose some of their leverage because they have really lucrative contracts. Retired soldiers have lucrative contracts with these, arms sales, arms trades, and they oppose domestic production because they lose all their leverage to that end.
Think that the recent tragic upheavals in surrounding countries would make the U.S. or the UN, or the EU rather, the EU, want to move closer to Turkey or farther away?
Well, that's a very good question. I have no idea, in the sense that I'm reading a book on EU right now, and it's talking about the failure or the fall of EU as a project, because it has failed to project its sort of the normative high ground that it holds in terms of pluralism and democracy and tolerance in many ways, because it's not forcing its way, its leverage onto those countries, in the Muslim world and beyond, in terms of upholding these values. It has cooperated overwhelmingly with the secular authoritarian leaders. It has eschewed the European Union from engaging with the opposition Islamic parties and movements. And those are usually the main opposition movements. And those are not good signs in many ways. I'm not sure what the EU is trying to do or planning to do at this stage, but my guess is the US is a little bit more open towards engaging with those countries in many ways, especially with the Islamic parties, Islamic groups in those countries, and this we have seen with the Muslim Brotherhood, I think, in Egypt. It was for the first time, the regime engaged with the Muslim Brotherhood in talks before Mubarak actually left the office, and now Muslim Brotherhood will become a major partner in this constitution writing, and will become a main party in the elections. And I don't think it would have happened if U.S. didn't give the green light. That's important. But in terms of EU, that's difficult to say. Unfortunately, I mean, the British Prime Minister actually went to Egypt a couple of days ago. The French Sarkozy actually might be going to Tunisia, I think, or someone else, a leader from the European Union, is going to Tunisia today or tomorrow, I think. So I don't know, honest answer. I have no idea. I'm not an expert on EU politics, but my guess is it will be slow to react to the developments in the Middle East, unfortunately. I don't know if this is an answer.
Well, maybe I should have said, do you think that they should move closer or farther away as
Oh,
a
yeah.
result?
Oh yeah, I mean, I definitely move closer. I mean, they should definitely make it explicit that the demands are rightful. This violence should stop immediately in any way, just as it is happening in Libya. Much stronger stand. I mean, I can't really understand, when you're holding such a high moral ground on those issues and you're not responding as actively as you should be. That's puzzling to me. I mean,